One of the first things that I created in this program was a manifesto. And when it came time to select a thesis topic, I turned to it for guidance. It would be about simplification, stripping things away, finding the absolute, the bare minimum, the essence. So naturally, being pretty compulsive, this led me to a thorough investigation of energy. Sustainability, urban planning, industrial metabolism, and transportation. But none of these seemed to be enough. Then one morning, during a typical daily ride to school, I was noticing how a lot of our streets still don't have bike lanes. Mom, please avert your eyes for the next 25 seconds. How often, having traversed 5 lanes of traffic to get to one, it's full of parked cars anyway. There's a bunch of cars cutting you off as they try to turn. And of course, normal New York City chaos, like unpredictable pedestrians. Or the absolute worst, scofflaw bicyclists going the wrong way. And finally, after arriving at school and experiencing a random act of kindness from a guy in a sriracha t-shirt, I thought, how about bicycling? Bicycles are fast and quiet, non-polluting, and energy efficient. They're inexpensive, democratic, repairable, recyclable, and low-tech. Bicycles just might be enough. But was it a thesis topic? NPR's Freakonomics Radio revealed if you want to get away with murder in New York City, you should use a motor vehicle. And there's lots of statistics supporting this. Driver error, carelessness, or outright aggression factor in far too many collisions, and both bicyclists and pedestrians are paying the price. So I started reading again, and I discovered that bikes were actually quite popular amongst academics. I also attended a community board meeting discussing the installation of a bike lane on Spring Street. The community was polarized and tensions ran high. It seemed that many had already had enough of bicycling. Bikers and pedestrians are both being killed by drivers, and yet they can't get on the same page. Drivers hold sway because our culture has dictated it for decades. I resolved to change bicyclists and pedestrians' behavior and help them feel more connected to one another while shifting our societal bias away from the automobile. I began with crossblock. Cyclists approaching a red light position themselves perpendicularly to traffic and assume a crossblock position. The closed fists provide a form of defiance, while the open arms invite an embrace. Crossblock sends a message to cars that they are not the favored form of transportation, and sends a message to pedestrians that we're all in this together. But that wasn't enough. We're trapped in feedback loops of violent emotions generated, sustained, and amplified by our subjective experience of each other's behaviors. I mapped the dialogue, and I imagined a not-too-distant future where this violence abated. But instead, I saw a world blanketed by ambient computing technology where everybody is always connected to the network. And because most interactions occur through digital social media, encounters in the physical world become awkward, resulting in conflict that often leads to violence. Ole Jensen, a social scientist from Denmark, suggests that the more our digital networks become mobile, the mobile subject, to a large extent, is becoming what he or she is while being on the move. So with a bit of technological jujitsu, I flipped this digital universe and created Crosstalk. Crosstalk uses gestural interfaces embedded in wearable computers. When a pedestrian or bicycle experiences dangerous behavior, the victim executes a crosstalk gesture, quickly crossing the wrists over the forehead. Crosstalk sends a haptic signal to everybody in the intersection, and the crosstalk expands as they mimic the gesture. Crosstalk then sends automated messages written by psychotherapists and designed to be relationship building to everyone present at the time of the incident. The messages evoke empathy in others and provide constructive criticism to the perpetrator. Crosstalk wraps everybody in a therapeutically and technologically generated group hug, reweaving the fragile threads of community frayed by the proliferation of digital interfaces. But that still didn't seem like enough. Throughout my research, I returned to Ole Jensen, a scientist who seemed more interested in people than statistics, and more willing to engage with the world than observe it with scientific detachment. Exchanges of reciprocity become essential for the mobile order of everyday life, and these interactions are equivalent to negotiations in motion. I felt this passage both validated crosstalk and pointed a way forward. I'd created gestures and gestural interfaces. The next step now seemed totally clear. Experimental modern dance. Okay, maybe not totally obvious. I attended dance classes up at Barnard, observing the dancers' interactions during improvisational exercises. I wanted to create my own lab where I could study these negotiations in motion and experiment with interventions that could affect them. So I built a bunch of structures I called automotive avatars and gathered 28 people at the Wiseacres Dance Studio in Soho for my experience, Anarchy of the Imagination. A live jazz score informed the emotional trajectory, and under the direction of choreographer Jody Melnick, the people began to move. Jody challenged them to connect to their bodies and to each other as they navigated into a swirling mass. And just when people began to find their groove, the music reached a crescendo, and one by one, we pulled them aside and fitted them with the avatars. The space became more and more congested, but surprisingly, they'd learned to negotiate their interactions so well that they adapted to the avatars.
And then from that, you just walk in, and again, notice the difference. You feel freer or less attentive to the space when you don't have to concentrate on.
And so when it started, I started walking, and it was kind of uncomfortable. So my favorite moment, I guess, was when I felt like we just started to flow, and people started to, I guess, know each other.
She told us, stop, choose a pattern, go directly for it. When you get there, it won't be there anymore. And so I really concentrated on my pattern, and I went for it, and well before I arrived, it was gone. And then I had to adapt.
And I was like, wait, you can you don't have to go straight on, you can diagonal.
Eventually, people started tilting their frames.
Right.
And when someone would tilt a frame so that I could get by, I tilted as well.
Yeah.
And I felt a kindness to them.
But I think I felt more than anything a relationship to space through other people. That's what I come away with. Having this kind of practice makes us understand that we're always in motion with each other, and the spaces that we create together only depend on how we move together. And then the constructs that we put around ourselves affect how we move together.
The more you have an agenda that's very clear about not only where you're going to go, but how you're going to get there, the more danger there is.
Incredibly, many of the reflections after the experience corroborated Ole Jensen's theories, and I imagined recreating this event at schools and community gatherings all over the city. Perhaps this was enough. But a quote from futurist Simon Grand describing the difference between science and design captured my imagination. Science, he said, looks at the world as it is. Design looks at the world as it could be. Yes, I totally wanted to realize possible futures and disclose new worlds, and I dove into the future head first. I created a grid plotting sustainability on one axis and the price of gasoline on the other, delimiting 4 possible future landscapes. Looking at the upper left quadrant, where gas is cheap and sustainability is high, I developed a narrative where our sustainability efforts had lowered the demand for gasoline. Everybody would already ride bikes in this world, so to make the idyllic even more so, I developed music of the spheres. Music of the spheres bolts onto your handlebars and plays a sonorous tone as you pedal through the streets, alerting pedestrians to the presence of bicycles and avoiding unpleasant encounters. Each unit senses the proximity of other similarly equipped bicycles, and they automatically harmonize with one another. That was pretty awesome. So next, imagining a continuation of our present conditions where gas remains cheap and sustainability low, the air quality would obviously totally suck. So in order to ride my bike around, I'd need a nitrogen scrubbing, oxygen rebreather bike helmet. My first prototype featured this 360-degree view, but wanting to include that future's inevitable hostility towards bicyclists, my second prototype was a little more badass looking. You know, to keep cars from messing with you. Finally, contemplating a future of expensive gas and low sustainability, I imagine a class of foragers bicycling around slurping up spilled oil from the pipelines that will inevitably crisscross the nation. They process the oil in meth lab scale distilleries and sell the gasoline on the black market. While researching the plausibility of DIY gasoline distillation, a physicist from ExxonMobil conscientiously informed me that although technically feasible, it was going to be dirty, inefficient, and extremely dangerous. Perfect. I prototyped it on my bike, imagining a Mad Max caliber system out of salvaged parts. But was dystopia the only outcome? Remember when we clogged up the entire dance studio with avatars? People adapted. They took care of each other. So, striking a more optimistic note, yet still hoping to provoke meaningful dialogue, I developed a story that merges today's consumerist narratives with hipster coffee culture, creating tools for an unsustainable future. This resulted in a more bespoken option, featuring leather, wood, and a fancy, colorful impeller pump. Fashionable hipsters jettison their home coffee roasting systems and instead pedal off together on OkCupid-enabled oil collection dates, filling their growlers and returning home to discuss the nuances of filtering and mixing artisanal octanes. Nice. And so, like a Pied Piper, I'd led my classmates, my friends, and my professors through the intersection and into the future. But I still wasn't sure if it was enough. This quote from Nigel Thrift put things into perspective. We do not teach master students to make things. We don't teach them to draw or to program. We don't teach them all sorts of things which might be of interest if you believe that what we need is an experimental social science. Well, I'm sure you all agree after what you've seen today, I can proudly stand with my 14 classmates in the Products of Design class of 2015 and say, not on our watch. We might be enough. We are makers and doers, and when Alan recently told us you cannot see the end of things until you begin them, I thought about how I developed a reputation throughout this program for starting over. Not for giving up, but like the woman in my film, for realizing once I'd gotten there that I could adapt. So today, I'll take Alan's comment a step further and add that every ending is really a beginning in disguise. We are at the end of our journey through Products of Design, but today I can tell you that I feel certain I've had such a rich life filled with so many amazing experiences because everything I've ever finished was actually the beginning of something else. And early Sunday morning, as I put the finishing touches on this presentation, something sounded funny to me, different. There was a weird sort of quiet outside, an excited murmuring of voices, and then I remembered it was my favorite day of the year. 6th Avenue was closed to traffic, and 35,000 bicycles were passing on a car-free journey through all 5 boroughs, a heady, once-a-year taste of the dream I've been pedaling towards in this city for the past 25 years. And I can promise you that this is not the end. It's yet another beginning, and I implore you all, let's share space, adapt, take care of each other, and if we can just keep pedaling, in the end, I hope that it's enough. I'd like to offer a ton of gratitude to my father, whose passing 3 years ago initiated this journey to reinvent my future, to my mom and my sisters, my professors, my classmates, my friends, and most of all, Jocelyn, who's been through this with me every step of the way. And thank you all for joining me and my classmates today and sharing this amazing journey.
I see, no stool.
Okay,
I love this. Uh-oh.
Do you need it?
Move with me. No. Move with me. Yeah. Okay. Well, this is a wonderful surprise. So eloquent at the end, Steve. Thank you.
Thank you.
I can't see my notes. There was. Do you think you did enough in the thesis? Do you think you made enough stuff?
That was about a half of it, I
Yeah.
think. Maybe less.
You had to
I made a
cut.
lot of shit.
Yeah.
It was like,
I think I loved the music of the spheres. It was just crazy enough to work.
yeah, I mean, I hope that I can implement it. The VC, the aforementioned VCs, they've been mentioned several times
Yeah.
today.
Didn't buy it.
Well, she was obsessed with how large it was. I kept trying to explain it's a prototype. It's that big so the electronics can fit inside because they haven't been miniaturized yet, but she was not having
Except
it.
I want it that large, I think.
It's kind of cool, right? It's a
Yeah.
little boombox style.
We talked about the key of C because it's City Bike.
Yeah.
Yeah. You had mentioned your dad. When Steve applied to the program, he had a very long and just packed life, all sorts of design and audio and art. And the students are asked to submit 10 projects. They can be anything. They can be a knitting circle. They don't have to be 10 design things. And so Steve didn't do that. Instead, he wrote a book of his entire life story. How many pages?
I don't know. I think it was like
something.
40.
Oh, no, I think it was like 240 because
maybe.
I read it all. I might have read it twice. But your dad did play an incredible role in getting you here.
Well, you know, my dad passed away like 3 years ago. He was 83 when he went into the hospital. I spent the last 3 months with him. And, you know, I started thinking, you know, I'm now 52. I was like 50 when I started the program. I thought, God, I got like 30 years left, you know, to work. And
Minimum.
so I was really interested in, rather than just kind of, I felt like in my current very successful career in film that I had nothing to look forward to but a slow descent into mediocrity. And so instead, I decided to start from scratch so there was somewhere to go. And, you know, and he left me just enough money. I was like, okay, I could get like a Lamborghini or maybe a Tesla, or I could go to college and get a new degree and start over. And I decided to do that. And I guess the one thing I would add is that, like, no matter how successful I got in my career or whatever, at some point in every conversation with my mom, who's here today, she would sort of mention, like, you know, if it doesn't work out, you could always go back to school and get a master's degree. So, Mom.
That was the safety valve.
Yeah, here I am, finally.
I think it's worked out.
It's good.
Yeah.
It's been fun. It's been an incredible, and you know, it's just been amazing to be around all these incredibly inspiring young people, and it's made me feel young again. And
You've been so eloquent, Steve. Thank you so much.